Chapter 6. Justin woke early as he did every morning. The filming schedule didn't always call for an early morning wake-up, but it did more often than not, and his body had gotten used to it. Besides, early morning was always a good time for a run. The sun's rays dispelled less heat then, and fewer people roamed the streets. Of course, he didn't have to worry about people out this morning. Other than Ava, the beach seemed deserted, and he'd heard no sound from her room. He pulled on his shoes and opened his door. A stillness filled the house. Yep, she was definitely still sleeping. For the briefest of moments, he wondered what she looked like when she slept. Did she sleep on the left or the right side? Did her hair splay across her pillow? Justin shook his head to clear the thoughts and inserted the earbuds. Thoughts of Ava had no place in his head. In fact, no woman had a place in his thoughts. He was done with women, and as soon as he found another job outside the dating show, that would be a lot easier. He pulled open the front door and exited the cottage. This was his favorite time of day, when the sky was still dark and the sun just peeked over the horizon. As he ran, he felt the stress leave his shoulders. Too bad he couldn't get paid to run. When the sun was fully awake and sweat drenched his shirt, he headed back to the cottage. He would shower and get some breakfast. Then he could spend some time searching out new jobs. He was surprised to find the cottage still dark when he returned. It was nearly 8 a.m., and she had claimed she worked best in the morning. Justin wondered what her definition of morning was. He'd always been an early riser, even in his teenage years. When his friends slept in until noon on the weekends, he would be up at 7, working out or writing screenplays. His mother had often joked that he must have been a farmer in a previous life because his internal alarm clock seemed to follow the sun. Justin didn't think he would like farm work, but he didn't mind being awake when the rest of the world slept. Her door was still closed when he got out of the shower, and neither the smell of coffee nor the eggs and bacon he cooked seemed to rouse her either. He wondered briefly if he should check to make sure she was still alive, but he was enjoying the quiet. Besides, she would probably take that as another intrusion, and he could use the peace to do some research. Ava woke to the sun filtering in her windows. She yawned and stretched. Another long day of writing loomed ahead of her, but at least Justin provided her with plenty of character fodder. She was still processing the bombshell he'd dropped last night. Death was hard to process even for Christians, but she wondered if his antipathy towards God was just about his wife's death, or if there was more to it. Still, she couldn't believe people could look at the world around them and not see God's hand in it all. After dressing, she grabbed the stack of papers she had made notes on last night. Sometimes her mind worked best with her fingers on the keys, and sometimes it took holding a pen to make the words flow. Justin sat at the kitchen table when she entered. His laptop took up the majority of the small table, leaving Ava with little room. You know, there are other places you could put your computer so that others could eat breakfast. She opened the fridge and pulled out 2 eggs and the package of bacon. You overslept. His eyes didn't waver from the screen, not even a glance her direction. It's 9:30, which I'm fairly certain qualifies as morning time, your best writing time, which means you should be in the main room. That makes the kitchen available right now. But I haven't eaten yet. Ava tried to keep the frustration from her voice as she pulled out a skillet and placed 2 strips of bacon on. That's not my problem. You're the one who set the schedule and picked the times, if I remember correctly. He had her there, but Ava wasn't used to such a rigid schedule. Her book had deadlines, but how she got there never followed a strict guideline. She wrote when she felt like it, when the words came. I did, but that was really more a suggestion of when my best writing time usually is. Justin did look up at her then, like she had grown a 3rd head. A schedule is just that, scheduled out blocks of time. Those aren't suggestions. Okay, so he was a stickler for time. She'd make a note of that and set an alarm clock from now on. He was obviously not a creative mind like herself. You know, you might enjoy the world a little more if you relaxed a little. I am relaxed. Yes, I can see that from your appearance. By the way, you have an alfalfa cowlick thing going on today? She smiled as his hand shot to his head and patted his hair. Yeah, definitely relaxed. He glared at her, but the bacon began to sizzle then, the heavy aroma filling the air, and she turned her attention to the skillet. When the strips were sufficiently brown and crispy, she transferred them to a plate to cool and then cooked her eggs. A few minutes later, she added them to the plate and returned to the table. There was just enough room for her plate. She said a quick prayer and then picked up her fork. What are you working on anyway, if you don't mind me asking? His response was an irritated stare. Not that it's any of your business, but I'm looking for new employment opportunities. Why? Don't you like being the host of a reality dating show? Ava didn't watch reality television. She rarely watched television at all, unless she was low on ideas and needed some inspiration. But Justin seemed like the perfect host. Every hair lay in place as if trained meticulously. His skin glowed that nice shade of brown that looked like the sun blessed him, though Ava would bet it came from time spent in a tanning bed. She hadn't seen any streaks, so if it came from a bottle, he was good at applying it. Plus, his teeth glistened in the same way the quartz rocks did she often found by the water. Veneers, probably. She doubted anyone's teeth were that perfect naturally. Her own dentist kept pushing her to do veneers, but Ava not only liked her slightly crooked bottom tooth, but hated the thought of sanding her teeth to a pulp only to put some artificial cover on them. In fact, maybe she needed to find a new dentist who didn't pitch that offer at her during every visit. It's fine, but I want something more, something bigger. When Peter and I first had the idea for the show, I thought I'd be there a year, maybe 2, and then it would springboard me onto a larger platform. How long has it been? Ava picked up a piece of bacon and took a bite. 10 years. Ava almost choked on her bacon. 10 years? How does a dating show last that long? Justin shrugged and his eyes fell back to the screen. I suppose there are a lot of people out there looking for love. Ava couldn't contain her curiosity. Are you? She told herself it was research, nothing more, but she found herself holding her breath as she waited for his answer. Looking for love? His eyes flicked briefly to hers, and then he shook his head. No, love and I aren't really on the same page. Ava wanted to ask why, but she kept her mouth closed. Was it because of his wife? Had there been love after her? Or maybe it went all the way back to his childhood. A divorce of his parents, an affair, 1,000 different reasons raced through her mind. Whatever it was, her imagination was probably more interesting than his reality. What about you? He stared at her again, this time with one of those expressions, like he was trying to figure out what she was thinking. She almost laughed out loud. Her head was a dangerous place to be, with all the thoughts and storylines jockeying for position. She doubted he would enjoy the experience. Me? Well, I'm a romance author, so I'm always looking for love. Justin snorted and turned back to his laptop. Figures. Her grip tightened on her fork. What does that mean? It just figures you would write sappy love stories. You seem like an optimist. And what's wrong with being an optimist? Her hackles rose up, the need to defend herself and her occupation taking over. It's not realistic. There are no happy endings, just happy moments you might get to enjoy before life comes and slaps them away. Ava shook her head. Wow, who stole the color from your rainbows? His face wrinkled in confusion. What? I just mean that's a terrible view on life. How do you work on a dating show with that outlook? He said nothing and the pieces fell into place. Oh, so that's why you want to leave, isn't it? You can't stand watching others find happiness. Fleeting happiness, he said, rolling his eyes. They usually only last 6 months before they break up. All of them? Ava found that hard to believe. Even on a dating show, there had to be a few who found lasting happiness. None have lasted? He stared at her as if he couldn't believe she would ask such a stupid question. That third head had probably grown a third eye. Fine, 2 of them have. Ava smiled smugly. And what did those 2 couples have that the others didn't? Who knows? Luck more than likely, he said. But his eyes had shifted. He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. He either knew or suspected what kept those couples together, but didn't want to share, and Ava wondered why. You'd better get to writing. It's almost 10, and I can't promise to be quiet after lunch. Before she could respond, he shut his laptop and left the room. Ava smiled as she finished her breakfast. He was right, and he'd spurred her creative juices enough she thought it would be a very productive couple of hours.